don't just say something like, let me know if there's anything that I can do to help, because that puts the onus on the patient, because they're thinking, oh, now I have to think of something for you to do. And I don't really know what I need. So if you can think of something that's practical that you think is going to be useful, then just going ahead and doing it and saying, yeah, I've come to your house with food for you tonight, or I'm going to take you, or I'm going to keep you company, or whatever it is, just having a think and taking that initiative.
That's the voice of Sam Alexandra Rose. Today on Living Big Mindfully, Sam is in the spotlight. She is an incredible woman with an inspirational story. This is exactly the kind of story that I love to share with you. She was born with a rare genetic condition, and she is an author and a 3-time cancer survivor. She starts off with telling us a little bit about that genetic disorder, her personal story, and some of the journey that it's taken to get her to where she is today. Then we take a deep dive and we talk about really how all this has affected her life, and her identity, and all the work that's taken to rebuild that and those things. We chat a little bit about how she's been able to manage the roller coaster of the emotional ups and downs and the highs and lows. I can't even imagine. And then she shares a little bit about how she's found and used creative writing to really begin to make meaning and sense of everything that she's been through. And then lastly, Sam shares some lovely, heartfelt sage advice for listeners. So again, thank you for listening today. Please feel free to share this episode with a loved one that might need a little extra. And remember to check out katechampionauthor.com, where you can find other books and resources. There's a newsletter, there's a community, all kinds of things to help you along the way. As always, I thank you. I'm here for you. I support you. Here's Sam. Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Hi, Kate. I'm great. Thanks. How are you?
Good. It's so nice to connect with you. Where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling from Northamptonshire in England.
Awesome. So there's a bit of a time difference. So thank you. Thank you for showing up today and coming on the show. And so tell me a little bit about you and your background and your story.
It's always so interesting, I think, to know where to start with this question, because one of the things I've been thinking about recently is like, what is the first thing that people say when people like ask, well, tell me about yourself? And for me, I'm a 3 times cancer survivor, and that is often where I start, just because it has infiltrated so much of my life. And I know that people say things like, don't let cancer define you, and we're all like so much more than our cancer diagnosis, which is all true. But as I guess I'll explain today, it has really impacted every kind of aspect of my life in some positive ways as well as negative. I guess I'm kind of careful about saying that. But yeah, so I'm a 3 times cancer survivor, and I have an ultra rare genetic condition, which is called CMMRD, or constitutional mismatch repair deficiency, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I'm also a PhD student researching creative writing and how can I use poetry to investigate my experiences with cancer. And I work for a charity part-time as well, which is called Bowel Research UK, and we fund research into bowel cancer and other bowel diseases.
Wow. So I'm looking at you, and this is just audio. I'm looking at you, and you look actually pretty young to have had cancer 3 times. So how old are you, and when did this start? I mean, when did this start? When did you find out? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I'm 35 now. I had my first cancer diagnosis at the age of 22 back in 2010. I'd just come out of university. Well, I've been out of university for a few months, so I was still living at home with mum and dad, looking for my first proper job outside of uni. And I went to A&E because I had bleeding out of my bottom, to put it bluntly, that wouldn't stop. So I went to A&E and they found a little polyp, which is like a little growth that was causing the bleeding. Went through various tests and investigations and found out that I had bowel cancer. So I had...
Time out. So let's just pause there. I can't imagine, right? You go to basically, what's an A&E? What does that stand for?
Oh, sorry, the emergency room.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So the emergency rooms are here, the emergency department, the ER.
Yeah.
You've got blood coming out of your bum, basically.
Yeah.
And they say to this 22-year-old, oh, you got bowel cancer. I mean, what was that like in that moment? I just can't even imagine.
Yeah, well, I mean, it took a little while to get there because, well, the initial visit, we didn't know that was what it was. They said, oh, there's a polyp. I had to stay overnight and have a blood transfusion because I'd lost quite a lot of blood at that point. And so that happened in the January of 2010, but it wasn't actually until I think May or June that I was actually diagnosed with bowel cancer, because I had a colonoscopy. And I think I had maybe a CT and MRI and some other bits. You know, it gets a little bit fuzzy remembering all the details. But yeah, I remember being told about that first diagnosis, and I was in the room with my mum and dad. The surgeon was saying, you know, we found a lot of polyps when we did the colonoscopy, and some of them have cancerous cells. And what we're going to do is remove your entire bowel, and you're going to have a stoma, you know, like a colostomy bag. But this is called an ileostomy for technical reasons I won't get into. And my mum cried. My dad, in his very dad-like way, asked the surgeon if he was the best man for the job, which the surgeon, I don't know if he took a little bit of offence to, I'm not sure. But, you know, fair question to ask, I guess.
Going for the practical is the best guy, but it is a great question. Yeah. So what about you? What was that like in the moment? You get your mum crying, your dad trying to get the best care for you, and the surgeon guy, 22, and he's saying you've got this bowel cancer and you're going to have a colostomy bag. I mean, what's that like?
I think I just felt like numb and in disbelief at that time, and probably for quite a long time afterwards as well. And my dad kept thinking that the surgeon was saying stomach, not stoma, because none of us had heard of a stoma before. I mean, we knew like roughly what a colostomy bag was, but yeah, we hadn't heard of stoma. They gave us some leaflets and things, which I kind of refused to look at. And they also gave me a little sponge stoma that you can kind of stick to your belly so that you can see what it would be like to have a stoma. Again, didn't use it. And then even after I had the surgery, I think it was a good few days in the hospital before I actually looked down at my belly to see it. So I think right from the beginning, there was a lot of disbelief and probably denial as well in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what happens next?
So I had the surgery to have my whole bowel removed. I was in the hospital for about a week. Right from the beginning, they said that it was only going to be a temporary stoma. So what that means is that they can reverse it after a few months. They make a kind of makeshift large intestine out of part of your small intestine, and that's called a pouch, an internal pouch, or sometimes it's called a J pouch. And what that does is it kind of learns to absorb fluid from waste in the way that a large intestine would, which I think is just so clever. It's amazing, like the science behind it, and yet obviously the medical teams and just our bodies and how they can adapt to that kind of change is, it's kind of amazing.
Mm-hmm. So is that one when you connect with like the awe of it, right? The wonder of, wow, science and these medical teams and what they can actually do for a person. Is that the part that kind of brings you kind of joy, and you feel kind of joy and gratitude and kind of wonder about? Is that are those the kind of the up parts of this journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I think about too much, but it does sometimes pass through my head, especially when I see other people suffering online as well. And the cancer community, especially on Twitter and I think on Instagram as well, is so huge, and everybody kind of comes together. And it's really when I see other people as well going through similar things, that I do feel a little bit grateful at that time as well. But yes, I think it is definitely kind of a miracle that I'm sitting here talking to you today, especially because of the genetic condition. But yeah, all of the surgeries that I've been through as well. And yeah, some have been, harder than others as well. They have been quite difficult to get through.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the emotional. So we've talked about some of the physical stuff, like the surgeries and the reconstructions and things like that. But what about the emotional toll? Tell me a little bit. I mean, you're a young woman. You're really 22. In the prime of your life. You should be, out with friends and partying and doing whatever, right? But then you're not. You're dealing with this cancer thing. What was the emotional component like? Tell me a bit about that.
I think at the time when I was waiting to be diagnosed and going to all these hospital appointments and then being given the diagnosis and going through the surgeries and then afterwards trying to deal with how to look after this colostomy bag with a lot of help from my mum, I should add. It was probably made easier because we knew it was only temporary. And I kind of went through all of that, and you're just kind of going through the motions and just doing like what the doctors are telling you to do and just sort of taking it as it comes. And it wasn't really until afterwards, after I'd had the reversal operation and I'd been back to my consultant and he said, you don't need any chemotherapy or anything. So that was just surgery for me. It was after that when I guess I had imagined being like, okay, cancer's gone, that's all sorted, having my reversal, my kind of plumbing is going to go back to normal, if you like. Time to get on with life now, get back to what I was doing, which was looking for a full-time job and to start my career. And I didn't expect at that time that actually, because I hadn't processed things while they were happening, because I was just going through the motions and taking things as they came. It wasn't until after it was all kind of over that everything hit me. And I've found that a lot of cancer patients and survivors say the same thing. It's afterwards that the emotional part hits you. And for a few years afterwards, I was really kind of down about it. I think I hid it quite well and I dealt with it quite well. And again, a lot of it was through writing, but it was just sadness over what had happened to me. Fear, massive fear of it happening again, of the cancer coming back. That is just absolutely huge, especially when you're going back to scans and things and then waiting for results from those is really scary. And then it can manifest in different ways as well, like nightmares. I mean, I still, have like bad dreams every now and then about it, being in the hospital or being told, you've got a different type of cancer or whatever. And intrusive thoughts and memories as well. I wouldn't call them flashbacks as such, but yeah, very much kind of intrusive, because the whole thing is intrusive to your life, not just thinking about like, oh, long term, this is disrupting my plans because it's impacted my infertility or what I was, I was going to go out and get a job and all of this sort of stuff, but also just the day-to-day impact of cancer, because, you'll just be sat at a desk at work and then suddenly get a phone call and it's the hospital, and all of a sudden you're not just writing emails to clients or whatever it is, you're being sucked back into this medical world. So that, yeah, it takes its toll, and trying to balance those two worlds is something that I often come back to as well.
Yeah. Wow. You talk about that so eloquently, and just, I'm really connecting with that, right? We just have this ability to kind of compartmentalize, right? We can compartmentalize, the day-to-day practical stuff. And sometimes we're so in that we forget that there's a whole river of kind of emotions kind of under that we haven't connected with and we haven't processed with. And I think that's actually probably, there's a reason why we do that. So we can cope with the practical stuff. Yeah. But then the emotions do come up, right? And if you're not dealing with them, you're not talking to them through them, you're not getting support, they will come up in the body. They'll come up in anxiety or depression or in your nightmares or in these kind of, recurring thoughts over and over. Yeah, you make some great points. So how did you begin to realize that there was some emotional stuff going on and in that sense you were struggling? And then how did you begin to kind of work through that? I'd love to talk about that and give listeners some idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I kind of came to realize that it was happening. I definitely managed to get through writing, and also I have a really good support system. So I have my partner. We've been together since we met at uni, so 2006. So, before I had cancer, we were already together for 4 years. And then my parents as well, and we were a very close family. So that definitely helps. And it's interesting as well because I've always been a writer. I've always written in various forms. But it wasn't until around 2012, so about 2 years after my diagnosis, that I actually started writing about cancer. I probably didn't write as prolifically then as I do now anyway. But that's just sort of interesting to think about and wondering kind of why that is. But it really sticks out for me the first couple of times that I wrote about cancer, and because I like to get my work published in literary magazines and things like that as well. I do remember the first story about cancer that I wrote and had published in a magazine. And then,
can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that story? And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I remember sitting in bed writing it. It was late at night, and it was, as I say, 2012. And the story, it was only about a page long. It wasn't very long. It wasn't really a story in kind of the normal sense. I guess it was a bit of a sort of a memoir, short piece. But it was called 2010. And I just experienced kind of, again, like flashback, but sort of intrusive memory while I was lying in bed. I can't remember exactly what the memory was, but it was something about being in a hospital, and it just really took me right back there. So I just wrote this piece about how I was lying in bed, and then suddenly I wasn't. Suddenly I was back 2 years and I was in the hospital, and then kind of coming back out of it, and the effects that had. And I guess I found it quite cathartic to be writing about that experience. And in lots of different ways over the years, writing about cancer has helped me to kind of work through it, because you can write, of course, in like so many different ways, and different types of writing, I think, helped me. So, for example, fast forwarding to 2021, I wrote and self-published my memoir, and that was really helpful because by then I'd had 3 cancer experiences, and it all gets a little bit muddled in my head. So it was really helpful for me to be able to write everything from 2010 to around 2019 and get the timeline sorted out in my head, so that, it just sort of straightened everything out. And that's also a good resource as well for me to go back to if I ever need to remember everything. So writing in a kind of linear, chronological way is really helpful. But I think also there's a lot of ways that people talk about cancer that are not helpful for me. so like the battle language that you often see in the media, you know, people saying like so and so, such and such celebrity died, they lost the battle, so and so is fighting. And, you know, some people with cancer do like that kind of language, and they feel maybe stronger or empowered or in control, and it helps them. And that's, you know, fair enough. I think that everybody should be able to use the language that they want to use to explain their illness experiences. But for me, I don't really like that language, because I mean, I wrote a poem once about this where I was just sitting at work. I'd recently had my second and third cancer diagnoses, and I was thinking about this kind of language, and I was on my break at lunch in the office, and I was like, I'm not sat here fighting anything. You know, I have cancer right now, but I'm not fighting. I'm just sat here eating my lunch. You know, I'm just trying to sort of do the best I can. So I find that writing really helps me, because I can find other ways of talking about it that resonate with me. And a lot of that comes out in different metaphors that I use to explain cancer. And it's good as well, because it means that you're creating something out of something negative, you know, and maybe that's something that you end up being proud of because you think that you did a really good job with a poem or whatever it is. So yeah, definite benefits for writing in that way as well.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way, right, to put all the fear, right, the fear, the worry, the anxiety, everything in the body. I mean, really, it's trauma, right? It's medical trauma, everything the body is going through. It's a beautiful way to process that and put that on paper and begin to kind of make sense of it, trying to make sense of the senseless, you know. But it's a beautiful way to do that. Really lovely. So I'll make sure I put some links to your work and that memoir in the show notes. So yeah, so let's just pause for a minute. Let's just take a breath. What do you, as we talk through this a little bit, I'm just curious, what are you noticing? What's coming up for you right now? What are you noticing in the body? What is it like to kind of share a little bit of your personal journey?
I think I'm so used to sharing my story now, because it is something that I do a lot. And it's always really interesting to tell somebody new, because it reminds me of how crazy it's all been. Because, you know, you get used to like what's happened to you, you know, you kind of come to terms with it. You tell lots of different people, and then you have certain ways that you tell the story. Maybe you sort of use the same words or the same kind of structure every time. And it's interesting when you're telling somebody new and seeing what those reactions are. Kind of reminds me like, oh yeah, this was really massive and traumatic. And I'm just kind of used to it now, but it's nice to have outside reactions to that.
Yeah. So I'm a therapist, right? So I sit with people a lot and look at their body and their body language and their facial expressions. And I can honestly, I'm sitting with you, and I really, not that I don't believe people, but it's really resonating with me that you have worked through a lot of this. I'm not picking up a lot of extra anxiety or extra trauma or extra, you know, depression. And I really do feel like you're pretty clear, right? You're pretty clear, and you've worked through a lot of that. And would you say that was due to the creative writing?
Yes, I think that definitely helps, having a way to express it, and especially because it's often difficult talking to people, especially the people close to us. And I think sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers on the internet, for example, about things, because they're kind of objective.
So tell me about that, because I do work with a couple of people that have cancer currently, and I hear that from them, that they don't want to talk to their close, intimate circle about this. So they have therapists, right? They have somebody like me to talk to. So why is that? What is that about? You don't want to really get in deep with your intimate circle. What is that about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to talk to my partner about pretty much anything. I think that it depends who you're who you're thinking about and what you think that their reaction is going to be. So, for example, I know that my parents worry, as parents do. So maybe I would only kind of tell them things if I really needed to. So that's my parents. And I think after my first diagnosis, because when I was going through everything, like, people kind of rally around and they're there for you. And then when things are all over, they think, oh, you're all better now, everything's okay again. Probably because they want that to be true. But actually, as I explained, the emotional side of things really hit me not during, but afterwards. And that is when I still needed that emotional support. But I kind of felt at the time like other people, like outside of really close family, like other people had just kind of forgotten or moved on. And I'm like, I'm still here in this, kind of hell. But everybody else thinks that I'm fine. And that probably contributes to making it difficult to communicate with people as well, because it's kind of like, if they don't know, then they don't know. And that's not entirely their fault. And you can't really blame people if they don't know. But then that puts the onus on me as the cancer patient to then start the conversations, those difficult conversations. And I think you've got to be really careful who you do that with, because some people are just not going to be receptive to it or respond in the way that you want them to. So yeah, I think it's really difficult at that stage.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And as you're talking, I'm kind of, again, looking at, so the physical stuff is over, right? The surgeries and the healing and the gazillion appointments. But then, as you said, after that, you kind of went into the emotional river, right? That you hadn't been flowing in. And then that emotional stuff is, it's really hard to see, right? There's no scars, there's no healing, there's no surgery appointment, right? It just kind of comes out probably at night, late at night, when it's quiet, when you're by yourself, right? All these kind of thoughts and people don't see that. People don't see that. And I think that's where there's a bit of a danger zone, right? That's where some of that depression and anxiety and that sense of isolation can really kick in for people. So yeah, that's really a great point. So, what would you tell? So kind of strategies, what would you tell people about, if they're going through cancer or they have a loved one that's going through this cancer journey, how might you guide somebody through it from the emotional component?
I would say to people who have a loved one who has cancer, again, for that kind of all the way through, kind of during and afterwards, just to keep checking in with people, because as I say, it is difficult to start those conversations yourself. It does feel good when other people are checking in and saying, it's as if they're saying, I haven't forgotten. I know that this isn't something that you're just going to recover from overnight. I think it's really good to have those kind of people around you. And then if you do have some kind of outlet, whether it's talking to somebody close to you, whether it's to finding your community online or maybe in a support group or something like that, or some kind of creative outlet, whether that's like writing or starting a blog or doing something different that's creative, like drawing or something like that, anything that kind of helps you to express things and feel like you have a little bit of control over this like small part of your experience. I think that is what has helped me.
Yeah, those are great tips and strategies. So for somebody that isn't a writer or doesn't really, sometimes, again, as a therapist, I encourage people to journal now and again, and then they have a really hard time with even looking at that blank page and putting pen to paper. And it's like, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, or I can't write, I can't journal, blah, 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 blah. So how might you coach somebody through, okay, let's just begin to put some words on the page. What are some really practical tips for somebody that feels like they just can't write, or they can't journal, or they can't put words down?
I feel like part of the problem might be that when we're adults and we're doing this kind of hobby, if you like, whether it's writing or some kind of art, we often do it with the aim for it to be good, to have some kind of skilled output at the end. And I think if you remember that it's something that's just for you, and nobody else is going to see it if you don't want to show them. There's no pressure for the words to be good. What you could try is something called free writing, which is when you just sit down, like maybe you want to set a timer or something, and just write, which I know is really bad advice for somebody who says, I can't write, I don't know how to do it, just write. But to try and like definitely switch off your inner editor, because that isn't, going to help. And just sit down, pen, paper, just put the pen to paper and just start moving your hand and just see what happens. Or maybe you could start with a sentence. Maybe you could start by writing about what you can see in front of you, what's in the room, what's next to you. And, you don't need to go straight into this is how I'm feeling about cancer. This is like the dark, the intimate bits. You can start somewhere light and, draw yourself in slowly and just keep writing. That's what free writing is. You just start writing, you just keep going. Don't worry about what it actually is that you're churning out. Don't worry about spelling, grammar, anything like that. Just keep on going and, just see what comes out. Because the interesting part of writing for me is that it sometimes helps me to discover things that I didn't know that I thought. I can have eureka moments by writing, and I'll look back and be like, oh, so that's why I think this, or that's my relationship with my body in that way. And that's because I do like to kind of psychoanalyze myself a little bit as well. But if you can just break that kind of barrier and just try and get started, it could be really beneficial. But I know it can be difficult to start.
Yeah. So you mentioned something, and those are great tips. Thank you. And 100% on board with all that. You mentioned something back there about the relationship with your body. And then for me, what came up is, there's probably an identity piece here, right? There's how do you shift your identity from I'm a woman, I'm a human being, to with this whole cancer thing, because it has to be so big and so consuming. So tell me a little bit about maybe the relationship with the body or the identity piece. Tell me how you work through that.
Yeah, I mean, identity has become such a huge part of what I think about, especially during my PhD, because by the time I got to start my PhD in 2019, I was going at it for about a year. And then I realized, you know what, I've been actually writing about cancer for maybe 10 years now. Maybe I don't just want to write about it, because I went into my PhD thinking I'm going to write lots of poems all about cancer and my experiences and what happened. And then, about a year in, I was thinking, actually, maybe I want to write about other things as well. And then the question for me became, well, if I'm not going to be writing about cancer, then what am I going to be writing about? And who else am I outside of a cancer survivor? And that was a very difficult question. And what was really interesting for me, because you just said like how kind of big and all-consuming cancer is, I ended up dividing my work into poems and stories that are related to cancer and poems and stories that aren't related to cancer, which I think is a really interesting way that I divided things up. Really, just cancer and then everything else, as if everything else in the world combined is as big as cancer on its own. Do you know what I mean? Like, cancer is the same size as everything else in the world that I can possibly think of related to myself or not. So that was just an interesting observation that came to me.
I'm just resonating with that, because what is that just tells us all how huge this cancer thing is, right? Even the word, right? We hear the word, or a loved one has this diagnosis, it just becomes whoosh, like massive. Yes, I totally get that. Totally get that. Yeah, yeah. So what did you? What were the other pieces? Right. So you had the cancer bucket. Let's call it the cancer bucket, where you'd write and work through that with words and poems, etc. What were in the other buckets? What are the other Sam buckets?
Oh, all sorts of random things, really. Let me think. I mean, I did a kind of diary piece on a holiday that me and my partner went on last year. We went to Florida. I've been about 10 times now. It's absolutely my favorite holiday, Disney World and all of that. So I did a piece on that because, it's just something that makes me really happy. I find that music comes up quite a lot for me because I'm a huge music fan, and I get a lot of kind of inspiration from what I listen to as well. And I also found myself just writing kind of surreal pieces, because maybe I'm just, I don't know, people have always said that I'm just a little bit weird, which I think is fair enough. But I wrote a piece about it's really weird sort of explaining this. I wrote a piece about a clown, and I'm on a like a high wire in a circus tent, and I'm looking down at a clown, and the clown is laying an egg. And I got this idea because I saw when you're Googling something and it kind of comes up with suggestions, and I must have typed in something about clowns. And then one of the suggestions was, do clowns lay eggs? And I was thinking, what a weird thing to Google. Who is asking? Of course, clowns, they're humans. That's so weird. Turns out that they meant clownfish. Do clownfish lay eggs? Which makes a lot more sense. But I preferred the do clowns lay eggs? Well, what if they did? Can I make a poem out of that? But it did turn out that poem was a metaphor for cancer, which often happens. I'll think that I'm writing about something completely different, and then I'll think, oh, actually, that's kind of symbolism for this particular part of my cancer experience. So yeah, that happens a lot.
Wow. So now I'm super curious. What was the symbolism with the clown laying the egg for the cancer? What was the symbolism?
I'm not sure if there was symbolism with the clown himself, but I was on the high wire, and I was holding, the long sticks. I don't know what they're called that you use to balance yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that the clown thought that I was holding a sword or some kind of weapon. And it was kind of a rebellion against this kind of fighting, this battle language. Like, people think I'm up here holding a sword, to fight, but actually I'm just here trying to balance myself, trying to stay upright. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. That's really lovely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Yeah. So back to maybe some advice or some tips for people that maybe, again, have had a loved one, who have a loved one that's just been newly diagnosed. How might you coach the caregiver? How might you coach the person that's trying to care for that person who's just had this diagnosis? What's important? I would say be led by that person and how they want to handle things, because everyone's going to handle it differently. Some people are going to want to know everything about their diagnosis, what's going to happen, maybe even seek out like scientific journals and things like that to really try and understand their diagnosis and what's going on with their body. Other people, probably like how I was back then, will want to know the absolute bare minimum. Otherwise, will really just sort of not want to think about it. So, does the person want to talk about it? Do they want to be distracted? What helpful things can you do for them? So, I mean, I can give examples of things that my partner has done and still does for me now. So, for example, he Googles things for me. Not because I don't want to know things anymore. I think that working in the research field has kind of moved me away from that now, and I'm a little bit more kind of curious about that sort of thing. But the internet is really a double-edged sword, isn't it? It can be a really not a great place. If you're Googling medical conditions, you might see something that, you really didn't need or want to see. So to help with that, my partner Googles things for me so that, he can be a filter for me, if you like. And he always tells me things he's positive, but in a practical kind of way. So it's not just blind positivity. It's positivity based on what he's read and what he thinks are facts, which is, really helpful for me to have some kind of like robust positivity that I can actually buy into is useful. And then on the practical side as well, just things like taking me to all of my hospital appointments, because trying to find a new hospital or park at a really busy hospital and then, worrying that you're going to be late for your appointment because you can't find a space, and hospitals are, for some reason, always an absolute nightmare to park at. And I'm a nervous driver anyway. So that kind of thing, is really helpful. And I think I should also mention as well that there's this thing that people often say that I tend to agree with, which is that maybe don't just say something like, let me know if there's anything that I can do to help, because that puts the onus on the patient, because they're thinking, oh, now I have to think of something for you to do. And I don't really know what I need. So if you can think of something that's practical that you think is going to be useful, then just going ahead and doing it and saying, yeah, I've come to your house with food for you tonight, or I'm going to take you, or I'm going to keep you company, or whatever it is, just having a think and taking that initiative, even if it's just like sending something nice as well. My friends have sent me lots of like nice things back in 2018 when I had my second and third diagnosis. They sent me some useful stuff for the operations I was having. So
so really taking action, right, for the caregiver, right, taking action and being a little more proactive versus these probably unintentional messages about the person that's having the cancer experience having to step forward and say, hey, I need this, I need that. But it's actually the other way around. Because I'm guessing you would say, if you didn't want something, you would say, oh, no thanks, or I'm good, or right. That way you have an opportunity to refuse if it's something that you really don't want. Yeah, that's a great point. So as we begin to wrap up here, is there anything else you want to kind of share or cover, or anything I should have asked but didn't ask?
Would you like me to tell you about the genetic condition specifically? Because that's quite an interesting one, this CMMRD.
Yeah.
So it stands for constitutional mismatch repair deficiency. And it's super rare, and interesting that we kind of talk about identity as well, because that definitely factors in, and what I was talking about before about denial and things like that, because it has taken a long time to come to terms with this diagnosis. So after I had bowel cancer, me and my parents went to genetic testing, because the doctors were like, well, why have you had bowel cancer so young? We should, find out if there's a reason why that is. So I went to genetic testing, and we found out that my parents both have a genetic condition called Lynch syndrome, which people may have heard of. It's not rare, but a lot of people, about 95% of people, don't realize that they have it. And it's a genetic condition that increases cancer risk, specifically for bowel cancer or colon cancer, and for gynecological cancers as well, and some others. It kind of depends which genes are affected. So both of my parents have Lynch syndrome, and how it works is that each person has 2 copies of this gene. So say my mum has a good copy of the gene and a broken copy, which means that she has Lynch syndrome, and my dad has the same. So I could have inherited my mum's good gene and my dad's good gene and not had Lynch syndrome. And that's what happened with my sister. So she and her kids were absolutely fine, which is great. Or I could have inherited a good gene from my mum and a good gene from my dad, or vice versa, and had Lynch syndrome. But actually what I did is I inherited both bad genes from my parents. So I have this CMMRD, which it turned out that my brother also had, who died when I was 1 year old and he was 16. And he had a brain tumor, which is quite common with CMMRD. So yes, so it's ultra rare. And in fact, 1 in a million people have CMMRD. So yes, super rare and kind of ridiculous that I've got it. But that is why I've had 3 different types of cancer, and my risk is increased for other types of cancer as well. So it means I have to go to lots of different scans and tests every year, and that's probably even more burdensome than it would have been if I just had cancer for kind of no genetic reason. But yeah, this increased risk has really meant that, I was in denial for too many years over CMMID. I kind of got to grips with Lynch syndrome after a few years and kind of allowed myself to think about it. But now CMMID is such a huge part of my story, because I've now written a book about it, which is actually published today as we're recording. And again, that's kind of been helpful to sort through, and writing has helped me to kind of come out of the denial from that. But that's taken, it was only been a year or so since I've actually been able to come to terms with the CMMRD. So I'm trying to embrace it a bit more as part of my story.
Yeah. So what's the title of the book? And congratulations. That's huge. I know what it's like to get that book out into the world. So what's the title? Tell us.
It's called the CMMRD book. So very, very, because as far as I can research, there is no other book published yet on CMMRD. And I was talking to my friend about this. I was messaging him. He's my editor. And I was saying, I've got a few ideas for titles. What do you think? We started talking about something else. I can't remember what, but he just kind of really offhandedly said, after all, it is the CMMRD book. And I said, well, maybe that's just what I should call it then, the CMMRD book, because it is currently the only one. So.
Wow. So you have an incredibly unique experience, right? Incredibly unique. And then you've got this whole family history, right? Your mom and your dad and your brother that passed away when he was so young. You have a huge lived experience. Wow. It's quite an incredible story. It really is. It really is. So I'll make sure I put links to the show notes to the book, and so readers can check it out. I know I'll be really curious now to check it out too.
Oh, thank you.
So is there, I'd like to finish up with the last question, right? Is there one piece of sage advice that you might want to leave with listeners as we wrap up today? And what would that be?
I would say just don't put things off. In my experience, because I have this increased cancer risk and I've had all of these cancer experiences, I feel, I think I was quite motivated, and I was just generally kind of an impatient person before, but even more so now, it really just makes me want to do things now, because, if you say, oh yeah, one day I will go to this city or, experience this or try this or whatever. One day often just doesn't really end up happening. So I would just encourage people to be proactive and just, do things now, because tomorrow isn't promised and you just never know what's going to happen. So again, be proactive, take action.
Yeah, amen to that. I mean, that's been a lot of my experience too, that, crazy things happen and they can happen really quickly. So yeah, live life, right? Live life and get out there and do things. So Sam, it has been a beautiful conversation. I'm so glad that we connected with today. Thank you. Where can listeners find you if they want to connect or check in or find your work? Where can they find you?
So I've got lots of poems and links to my books and all that sort of stuff at my website, which is writersam.co.uk. And I'm on socials, Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, and Threads and Instagram and so on, at writersamr.
Fantastic. And I will put links to the show notes so people can connect with you really easily. So again, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I wish you every success with the writing, with the PhD, with the book, and obviously staying healthy and well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been lovely.
Take care.
Thanks so much for listening. I truly appreciate you and your time. I love to hear from listeners, so connect with me at katechampionauthor.com. Remember to grab your free hiking guide, and please take a quick moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the show. Thanks so much. Take care. Until next time. Hey, me again. Just a reminder, this podcast should not be considered professional advice. It's also not a substitute for mental, physical, or any other healthcare-related treatment. For any questions about your condition and or concerns, please contact a fully licensed healthcare professional. Thank you.